want to talk about the idea of transgressions and violations in Macbeth. In the play, we see two different types of transgressions taking place. Those which are civil, in other words, breaking laws that society has set up, and those which are natural, that is, doing things which are considered to be against nature in general. One of the things that makes the Macbeths such a frightening couple is that they cross the line in both of these areas. So after Macbeth and Banquo encounter the witches, they meet up with King Duncan and the other Thanes of Scotland, and the news is broken to them that the current Thane of Cawdor was proven to be a traitor. The man is going to be executed, and Macbeth is given his title as a reward for being such a great hero on the battlefield. Macbeth and Banquo obviously are both stunned. The witch's prophecy has already partly come true, but they're the only ones that know about it. Macbeth sends a letter to his wife, telling her everything that's happened, and then King Duncan says that he and his men are going to spend the night in Macbeth's castle. Duncan at this point has put his absolute trust in Macbeth, and for the king to spend the night in someone's castle would have been a great honor. But in the ancient world, having a guest at all, be they royalty or otherwise, was considered to be a very serious, solemn thing. The host had a responsibility to keep their guest happy, well-fed, and this probably goes without saying, alive. To allow harm to come to one's guest would have been a disgrace to the host. If you've read the Odyssey by Homer, which we'll probably cover here in a future series, you may have noticed that a large portion of the poem is devoted to describing the receptions that the main characters receive at different places they visit. The host always gives the travelers presents before they leave, and these aren't cheap presents either. They give away really rare, valuable family heirlooms and things with sentimental value as well. At one point in the poem, Telemachus, who's Odysseus' son, tells the warlord Menelaus that he needs to get home to Ithaca to protect his mother from the drunken suitors. He's been searching for his father, who's been lost at sea for years and had been staying at Menelaus's for some time. What Menelaus says in response gives you some idea of how important the relationship between guest and host was. After Telemachus says that he wants to go home, we read this. The lord of the war cry reassured the prince. I'd never detain you here too long, Telemachus, not if your heart is set on going home. I'd find fault with another host, I'm sure, too warm to his guests, too pressing or too cold. Balance is best in all things. It's bad either way, spurring the stranger home who wants to linger, holding the one who longs to leave. You know, welcome the coming, speed the parting guest. But wait till I load your chariot down with gifts. Fine ones, too, you'll see with your own eyes. And tell the maids to serve a meal at hall. We have God's plenty here. It's honor and glory to us, a help to you as well if you dine in style first, then leave to see the world. And if you're keen for the grand tour of all Hellas, right to the depths of Argos, this is where they live, I'll escort you myself, harness the horses, guide you through the towns. And no host will turn us away with empty hands. Each will give us at least one gift to prize, a handsome tripod, cauldron forged in bronze, a brace of mules, or a solid golden cup. So, that's a pretty generous offer, and it was pretty typical for the ancient Greeks to treat guests like this. Now, others in the Odyssey, like old Nestor, don't quite comprehend this idea of balance as Menelaus does. Telemachus purposely avoids going to Nestor's because, as he tells Nestor's son, who is traveling with him, Son of Nestor, won't you do as I ask you, see it through? We're friends for all our days now, so we claim, thanks to our fathers' friendship. We're the same age as well, and this tour of ours has made us more like brothers. Prince, don't drive me past my vessel, drop me there. Your father's old, in love with his hospitality. I fear he'll hold me up, chafing in his palace. I must hurry home. The son of Nestor pondered, how to do it properly, see it through. Pausing a moment, then this way seemed best. Swerving his team, he drove down to the ship tied up on shore and loaded into her stern the splendid gifts, the robes and gold Menelaus gave, and sped his friend with a flight of winging words. Climb aboard now, fast! Muster all your men before I get home and break the news to father. With that man's overbearing spirit, I know it all too well. He'll never let you go. He'll come down here and summon you himself. He won't return without you, believe me. In any case, he'll fly into a rage. So, one of the names given to Zeus in Greek mythology, and which is used quite a bit in the Odyssey, is protector of strangers or guardian of suppliants. The idea was that if you didn't treat a guest right, you were going to feel the wrath of Zeus. And this wasn't just an idea peculiar to the Greeks, though. In the Bible, in the book of Genesis, we have the story of Lot, who lives in the city of Sodom. He takes in 2 angels who have come to his door for the night, and when the townspeople hear about it, they go to Lot's house and demand that he show the angels to them so that they can attack them. And it's implied that they're going to molest them because the people of the city of Sodom were all wicked. Rather than betray his guest over to the angry mob outside, Lot actually goes so far as to offer the mob his own 2 daughters, rather than fail in his duty as a host to the 2 angels. Now, the story of Macbeth takes place somewhere in the Middle Ages, and this code of hospitality was still viewed as a very serious thing. For someone to do what the Macbeths do, not only allow harm to come to their guests, but to betray him and kill him themselves, would have been the height of civil transgression and villainy. And Macbeth knows this. Listen to what he says when he's alone after Duncan has arrived at his castle. He goes, "He's here in double trust. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. Then, as his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off." He says that Duncan is so good, in other words, and so pure, that the heavens themselves are going to intercede, or at the very least give away the culprit of the crime. Macbeth knows that to commit this deed, he's not just killing a kinsman. He and a Duncan were apparently related somehow. And he's not just killing a king, which is something we'll talk about in a minute, but he's killing a guest, and that's the supreme evil. But because of his ambition and because of his wife's prodding him along, he's going to do it anyway. In modern literature, we see this evil enacted in George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, which the television show Game of Thrones is based on. By the way, spoiler alert, one of the most atrocious and heartrending scenes in the series is when Lord Walder Frey invites King Robb Stark and his men into his castle under the pretense of marrying one of his daughters to Robb's uncle. He then proceeds to have his men lock the doors and slaughter Robb and all of his men in cold blood while they're sitting down to dinner, all because of a perceived insult to Frey. The other characters in that series, even those who are forced by necessity to be allies with Walder Frey, exhibit disgust in private over what he's done. So that's one civil transgression. Now let's talk about another, which concerns kingship in general. In the Middle Ages, the king was seen as God's chosen vessel, or as a representative of God on earth. This theme is developed most strongly in another one of Shakespeare's plays, and my personal favorite, Richard II. I'll quickly read you a line from that play to give you an idea of what King Richard thinks about himself. Keep in mind that in these lines, Richard is using the royal we as he speaks, so when he says we, he's really just talking about himself, not anyone else. He threatens those who have come to depose him with these lines. "We are amazed, and thus long have we stood to watch the fearful bending of thy knee, because we thought ourself thy lawful king. And if we be, how dare thy joints forget to pay their awful duty to our presence? If we be not, show us the hand of God that hath dismissed us from our stewardship, for well we know no hand of blood and bone can gripe the sacred handle of our scepter, unless he do profane, steal, or usurp. And though you think that all, as you have done, have torn their souls by turning them from us, and we are barren and bereft of friends, yet know, my Master, God omnipotent, is mustering in his clouds on our behalf armies of pestilence, and they shall strike your children yet unborn and unbegot, that lift your vassal hands against my head, and threat the glory of my precious crown." So there's this idea that to strike at the king is to strike at God himself. Now, after Macbeth has already murdered Duncan and is pretending that he has no clue what's going on the next morning, and all the other Thanes are running around the castle like chickens with their heads cut off, Macduff, who becomes important later on in the play, says this: "Confusion now hath made his masterpiece. Most sacrilegious murder hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple, and stole thence the life of the building. We hear that language again. The king's body is the Lord's anointed temple. The body itself is compared to a building in those same lines. Now let's talk about the natural transgressions that take place in Macbeth. In the language that's used throughout Act 2, we get the sense that what Macbeth does actually poisons nature or weakens it somehow. Before he murders Duncan, right after the hallucination he has of the dagger, which we talked about in the last video, Macbeth observes this. Nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtain's sleep. Now witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings, and withered murder, alarmed by his sentinel the wolf, whose howls his watch, thus with his stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides, towards his design moves like a ghost. Then, when he's describing to the other Thanes the next day what Duncan's body looked like, he says this. Here lay Duncan, his silver skin laced with his golden blood, and his gashed stabs looked like a breach in nature for ruin's wasteful entrance. There the murderers, steeped in the colors of their trade, their daggers unmannerly breached with gore, who could refrain that had a heart to love, and in that heart courage to make loves known? The murderers he's talking about is the two guards that were set to watch over Duncan while he was sleeping the night before, who he and his wife sabotage. So we see that nature is breached, and ruin has broken in. This isn't the only time that murder is described as a sort of transgression or violation against nature. Later on, Macbeth hires some murderers to kill Banquo, for reasons that we'll discuss in the following video, and after they've committed that act, one of them reports back to him, and Macbeth asks if Banquo is safe. The murderer says this, Aye, my good lord, safe in a ditch he bides, with 20 trenched gashes on his head, the least a death to nature. Another natural transgression is enacted by Lady Macbeth when she basically asks malevolent spirits to take away her womanhood. But it's more than simply asking for her sex to be removed. All the language she uses is tied up not so much with sexuality, but with motherhood. She's afraid that Macbeth will be too much of a coward to kill Duncan, and she knows that she's going to have to take control for a bit. She says, Glamis thou art, and Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised. Yet do I fear thy nature. It is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition, but without the illness should attend it. What thou wouldst highly, thou wouldst holily. Wouldst not play false, and yet wouldst wrongly win. Further down, she continues, The raven himself is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here, and fill me, from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shall fell my purpose, nor keep peace between the effect and it. Come to my woman's breasts, and take my milk for gall, you murdering ministers, wherever in your sightless substance you wait on nature's mischief. So there's a lot of milk and breastfeeding imagery here, and this heightens later on when she tells Macbeth that, I have given suck, and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums, and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this. She's accusing him of being a coward because he won't kill Duncan. Going back to the Bible, we're told how the wicked changed the natural use into that which is against nature, and that they are without natural affection. Now nothing is more natural than a mother's affection for her children, but this is exactly the sort of affection that Lady Macbeth seeks to destroy in herself. Compare this to Lady Macduff later on in the play. When she hears that her husband has fled to England for help in order to overthrow Macbeth, she gets angry that he didn't tell her anything about it and left his family behind. She says, He loves us not. He wants the natural touch. For the poor wren, the most diminutive of birds, will fight, her young ones in her nest, against the owl. This is right before Macbeth, who has suspected Macduff of treason, sends servants to his castle to kill her and her children. And finally, we have the three visions that the witches show Macbeth near the end of the play. All three visions are in some way against nature. Either they themselves possess some supernatural quality, or what they promise seems supernatural. We have an armored head without a body attached, which tells Macbeth that he was right to fear Macduff. Then we have a bloody child that tells him that no man born of a woman will ever be able to harm him. And then we have a child holding a branch who says that Macbeth won't be overthrown till Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane. These last two in particular would require a breach or transgression of nature in order to be accomplished. All men are born of women, and trees can't get up and move on their own unless you're in J.R.R. Tolkien's world. Speaking of which, that scene in Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, where the Ents attack the Tower of Isengard, is very reminiscent and may have actually been inspired by Macbeth in the Birnam Wood scene. If you've never seen or read The Lord of the Rings, and the words that just came out of my mouth made no sense to you, basically an Ent was a giant living creature who looked like a tree. Here is an action figure, which I totally don't still play with, of an Ent from the Lord of the Rings movies, just so you can have an idea of what they look like. But in the end, these promises made by the apparitions are accomplished by fairly natural means, and one gets the sense that order has been restored to the universe. The child not born of a woman was Macduff, because he was a C-section child, and therefore was never technically born in the sense that he passed through the natural opening into the world. Birnam Wood doesn't get up and move toward Dunsinane itself, but Malcolm and Macduff's soldiers tear down the branches and assault the castle under cover of the foliage in order to hide their true numbers. And of course, the disembodied head ends up being Macbeth's own severed head. It's not floating around by some supernatural method, but has been cut off by Macduff's sword.